viewers, my name is Adam, and this is Seeking Media Productions, bringing you a video game review. In this video, I am reviewing The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This Zelda iteration is being distributed through the Nintendo Switch, which is essentially like this 8th console generation this time around, and is so far being very popular amongst this new era of video games. And this game being released once the Switch was actually released is going on 4 years now, and a sequel is in development. But at the time of this video, so far, the game is still highly playable and is still one of the many things that Nintendo is consistently always marketing just to help sales go along. But what makes this Zelda iteration a lot more different from this past works is that this is actually set at the end of the main timeline, which is very weird because Zelda essentially is like a very one of those games where it has a very strict formula, and like it does follow that formula as well, where you play as Link, the main character, who always has to go around rescuing the titular Zelda princess from the tyrannical force, which is normally Ganon. But being set at the very end of the main timeline essentially makes it like a more freer type storytelling experience, as even though there's mainly chronologically speaking, this is basically played like an epilogue of sorts from what has been previously told. Something that is like very loosely presented in past Zelda experiences is the idea of being reincarnated. And if you were to play the previous game, The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, it essentially lays out the reason why a lot of the events occurs throughout the Zelda timeline. And this one being essentially an actual sequel to all the previous Zelda adaptations so far, you'll have players are waking up as Link is discovering 100 years prior to Age of Calamity, where Hyrule used to be at the height of its peak, to the point that Hyrule was actually filled with a lot of ancient futuristic tech that, as far as most of the other regions go, has been very prosperous during that time. But once the Ganon force officially starts spreading out the land, well, that's where the trouble occurs. And once players are waking up as Link, they have to find a way to help disperse this threat and once again rescue Zelda from the clutches of Ganondorf. But Ganon in this version is more of his energy is basically the real threat cause, and most of the enemies and environments are affected through this calamitous type environment. So it's very so it's really something that will changes throughout the course of the gameplay. Speaking of gameplay, I like to go back to the idea that during this time of the story, Hyrule used to be at the height of his prowess with a lot of ancient type tech surrounding this land of Hyrule. And one of the main gameplay features in this game is the idea is the concept of Link utilizing something that's called a Shikai Slate, which has a lot of link to the past elements of what you'll find throughout the story. But essentially it's more like a very ancient type of tablet system, which is an in-game app that Link can utilize for either finding out his past memories, help traverse the map of the very open world environment, which is Hyrule, through very diverse regions, puzzles, and also some assistance in combat. Throughout this vast open plain, players are able to be more immersed in the environment than ever before, as survival is key in the Breath of the Wild. Players have to navigate through tough terrain, through the various very wildly intuitive weather-like system, where depending on if it's where you're at and the time of day, the weather can really affect your health and also the mobility of your environment. So it's key to dress accordingly when given if you're in a dry, wet, very cold, or very tropical environment. It also plays in the factor of cooking as a way of surviving as well as the right combination of foods where you can actually help make some very variety of meals like to the more gourmet settings is very tasty but also very looking good. It helps you with stats and also help with combat and also helps you with keeping yourself warm or cool depending on the environment. Also given in the Zelda game in Breath of the Wild is also the combat here, where Link is able to utilize a vast variety of weapons from many different types. Many of the melee swords, from spears, multiple swords, axes, and so forth. But here's the thing with that's different from other past Zelda games experiences, at least from what I have had from past games, is that the combat here is very simple. Most of the time is that you're able to just switch in and out at will and from the different types of weapons here. But it's mainly just go for just a quick button masher of swords. He still utilizes a lot of arrows and using the Shekai Slate can also be effective in use during these moments of the game. But if you're essentially something that's well equipped, like especially with an explosive arrow, you've essentially got a lot of going. Like that's all you have to do when it comes to combat. It's not a lot of things that you really dealt with. You at the time of this video, there has been a prequel of the game called Hyrule Warriors: Age of Calamity, which does a little bit more in depth with this combat system, where it's mainly utilizing a lot of combos and also a mix between light and strong attacks with the melees. But it's fairly there's a serious step up. It's something that really could have been utilized in the main product, which is the Breath of the Wild. Hopefully, in the sequel, something like some of that stuff from the Hyrule Warriors games could carry over into this game, or to the one that's being developed at least. But this simplicity in this combat is also carried over to the very few bosses that's also present in the Breath of the Wild, which yet again, because of how simplistic the combat is, like I really wish that there was like some form of puzzle like mechanic or something that you really got to think about how you're going to take down these foes. It's very repetitive at that point. But something that is very something that helps make this game more solid than most Zelda games is its presentation. Something that's very prevalent in this look of the game is the anime cel shaded graphics. Something that's not new in the Zelda series, especially if you know of Wind Waker or something that's more tuned to the Toon Link variety of games. Very similar to something like a Studio Ghibli like film. So it's very surprising or not that animated series of late has not been greenlit. But it really would be welcome to experience something like that, especially if something like Studio Ghibli were to have done it. But the open world here is very active and full of collectibles. I'm still finding ways and new activities to explore given the amount of hours that I've already put into this game. So it really helps with the replayability factor here. Also given in Zelda is this music, where it's composed by 3 credited composers whose work in this game in particular is very reminiscent to something that you'll hear from a Studio Ghibli film. It's though that frequent composers of them, Joe Hisashi, helps bring out the very vast naturalistic environment of you being like a tour de force adventure of this vast open plain. So if you're very tuned or very fans of that type of music, it's very incorporated into the score here, as well as the very familiar tunes of past Zelda games. Also, throughout the story, this is the first time that Zelda characters are actually talking. Dialogue is given mainly through flashbacks here, but dialogue is actually being audible done. But Link is still a character that is not heard through having any lines at all. Still no talking Link. But there you have it. That is my review for Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I'm giving this game a great review, mainly because if it was had very more in-depth combat, I would have gave it amazing. And also due to the fact that the story here is essentially you being thrust into like an epilogue of sorts, and so much of the story is very minimum, despite the mere fact that you have to like explore or like find out these whatever happens in the past. Like I wish that you would actually experience the actual story being told as opposed to you being fed exposition. So that's also a reason why it's not getting much more higher grade than I would have done. But nonetheless, it's still a solid game, and the presentation of the open world still leaves you with plenty to do. My name is Adam, and this has been a Sticky Media Productions. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe, and comment below what is your favorite Zelda games or what other Nintendo properties that you're still looking forward to. Please comment below. I want to hear your thoughts. Thank you, and goodbye.